This is Russia's legitimate concern. We have repeatedly said that the issue of Ukraine joining NATO is not currently on the agenda, and we are not the only ones who think so. This is a quote from Donald Trump's special representative for Ukraine, Kellogg, who gave a big interview to the television channel, and many people focused specifically on this statement. But in fact, there were a lot of very important quotes there, which we will go through with you today. For example, the fact that Kellogg is leaking information about Steve Whitcoff. He directly says that Steve Whitcoff is bringing a clearly Kremlin-aligned position to Donald Trump. And Whitcoff should really talk to European leaders before making any conclusions about the dictator Putin or Russia's position. Besides that, Kellogg directly says that Donald Trump, yes, really can walk out of the negotiations. But before slamming the door, he can do something very painful for Russia. In addition, Kellogg talked about how future negotiations on ending the war might go. And there are also many statements that are worth analyzing together with you. And Kellogg voiced some very important things here that are worth paying attention to. Not only his statements about Ukraine joining NATO, but also those statements that point to a certain split in the position within Donald Trump's team. And Kellogg says directly, I hope Trump will listen to those advisors who can explain the realities to the president and not, as he put it, fantasies coming from the Kremlin, hinting at Steve Whitcoff. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is May 30th according to the calendar. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and write a comment. This is very important. It will only take you 2 seconds, but it's very important for the channel. Also, subscribe to the Pechi News Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, I'll start of course with the loudest statements from Kellogg, which today have been picked up by many Ukrainian media outlets and not only Ukrainian ones. But unfortunately they missed some of his other quotes. I'll start with the loudest one. Kellogg says in an interview, quote, if Trump feels that he is being used and there is no prospect in the negotiations, he will say, we're done. Europe, this is your issue. Deal with it yourselves. And this is my main concern. This isn't just about Ukraine. It's a global problem, says Kellogg. Next, I will present a few more major points. Here, without much analysis, Kellogg says this is a legitimate concern for Russia. We have repeatedly said that the issue of Ukraine joining NATO is not currently on the agenda, and we are not the only ones who think so. The Russian Federation is not only talking about Ukraine, they also mention Georgia and Moldova. They are concerned about NATO expanding to their borders. And we say, okay, let's discuss this comprehensively, but this decision should be made by the president. This is essentially China's response to Kellogg regarding the earlier leak that the Kremlin is demanding written guarantees from Washington that NATO will not expand eastward. Kellogg says, in principle, Trump can promise this to the Russians. Next, about Trump's words that Putin is playing with fire. Kellogg says the following, don't put Trump in a situation where he feels like he's being used. He made a quite reasonable proposal, but only saw a tough, uncompromising position. This frustrates both him and me. We're not talking about you demanding that we sell Alaska back to you. There are reasonable discussions, in particular about joining NATO or the status of the 5 regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson and Crimea. As Kellogg says, security advisors from France, Germany, the United Kingdom and the United States have been invited to the negotiations in Istanbul, which may take place next week. Quote, Ukraine is still waiting for the Russian memorandum on the peace agreement. And then we need to combine the versions from both sides and determine which points are up for discussion and which ones are not subject to compromise. But what happened next in the interview with Kellogg, many missed, and that was a big mistake. The thing is, I think Kellogg is already leaking information about Trump's special representative and his close friend Steve Whitcoff. And this split in positions within Trump's team is only growing because Kellogg has already started to gently criticize the position of Donald Trump himself. So, Kellogg advised Steve Whitcoff to first talk to European leaders before taking Putin at his word. And Kellogg also warned Donald Trump against stepping away from the role of global policeman. He said that this whole idea of a multipolar world is very dangerous for the United States and for the world as a whole. And Kerkelo says, listen, I'm a general with a lot of experience, and I'm telling Trump that you can't play around with this multipolarity. You can't give up the role of global policeman. Because, for example, there is an agreement between Russia and North Korea on military cooperation. North Korea has already sent its soldiers to Russia. And if a war starts between South Korea and North Korea, Russia can send its soldiers there to North Korea. And America will be forced to send its soldiers to the side of South Korea. And that's the war that Donald Trump is so afraid of. That's why you can't just walk away and say, well, okay, I'm done. I'm not the world's policeman anymore. Here are the spheres of influence. Sort it out yourselves. So he says that won't work. But let's move on again, point by point. So Kit Kellogg gave a big interview. And here's a small excerpt from that interview. So they ask him, your colleague Steve Whitcoff said that he doesn't believe Putin wants all of Europe and takes him at his word. Do you think Putin can be trusted? Kit Kellogg answers.
I would advise Steve that it's better to talk to the German member Merz. You have the president of France, Macron, and you have the prime minister of Great Britain, Starmer. They see the world a little differently. They live in this region, and it's a tough region where they live. And they think they're at risk. I was just with the Finnish ambassador yesterday. I was with his people. And the Russians are really building up forces on their border. They have a long border, like Finland with Russia, and they obviously have concerns as well.
I would advise Steve Whitcoff to talk to the German Chancellor Merz, the French President Macron, and the British Prime Minister Starmer. They see the world a little differently. They live there as neighbors, and it's a complicated neighborhood, and they believe they're at risk. Just yesterday, I was with the Finnish ambassador at his residence. We had lunch. The Russians are actually building up troops near their borders. They have the longest border with Russia. It's obvious that they're concerned. The journalist asks, does Finland now feel threatened? Kellogg answers, yes, that's right. They have a very good president, Alex Stubb. He spoke with President Trump. And you need to be very careful when making statements like Whitcoff's when you talk about expansion. Because, as I see it, the reason why the United States should remain involved is escalation. Next, the journalist asks, Trump threatened to completely withdraw from the negotiations. We know how he can get angry one moment and he cuts you off. At what point will this happen? Kit Kellogg answers, if Trump feels that he is being used and that there is no hope for progress, he's like, that's it, it's all over, Europe, I'm handing this over to you, it's yours. And that worries me, that's what I keep coming back to. The journalist says, yes, what will happen to Ukraine? Kellogg, not just with Ukraine, what will happen around the world? Because this situation is different from what it was during President Trump's first term. Back then, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea acted independently from each other. Now they are all together. Now they have signed agreements, partnership agreements, or even defense treaties like with North Korea. And that's why the risk increases if you stop keeping an eye on all of this. Bad things can happen, and then you'll have to respond to them. I mean, hypothetically, all of this could happen. North Korea, as you know, has sent troops to Russia to fight against the Ukrainians. This happened on the battlefield in Kursk Oblast. But maybe it's the other way around. The treaty states that if a war breaks out between South and North Korea, Russia is obligated by the treaty to provide its troops. And it could happen that we see Russian troops on the Korean peninsula and you want to go fight there not thinking that anyone wants that. Well, now for the most interesting part, let's continue. Kit Kellogg adds that Trump needs to rely on advisors who can explain reality to the president, not fantasies coming from the Kremlin. And now let me remind you, Trump has only 2 official advisors and a special representative on Ukraine and Russia. They are Kit Kellogg and Steve Whitcoff. Who do you think Kit Kellogg is hinting at in this situation? Well, he's obviously not calling himself the one who passes on fantasies from the Kremlin. Of course not. He's hinting at Steve Whitcoff. And this is an interesting position because Kit Kellogg, on the one hand, yes, he voices things that are unpleasant for Ukrainians. That's obvious. It's unpleasant for us to hear this. It's unpleasant to hear about not joining NATO, about considering the status of the 4 regions plus the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. But on the other hand, he says that Trump cannot walk away from the negotiations. He cannot give up on all of this. You can't just say that this is your problem, otherwise even bigger problems will come to America. But a little later it will burn. Well, it's better to deal with it now than to come back to it later at a higher cost. That's why I especially like this interview. Some of its moments were sharp and slippery, but this split between Whitcoff and Kellogg is clearly visible. And it's not for nothing that Kellogg is still called a more pro-Ukrainian special representative of the American president. I'll put an ellipsis here. Write your opinion, your conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to leave a like.